Hey everybody. So this is episode 4, glass particulate trace evidence collection. Wanted to go over this. I know a lot of people have gone over the glass, how it was broken, the amount of glass, what type of glass, what tint of glass. And what I'm looking at today is trace evidence and how that is collected off of a piece of clothing or a surface. If Stephen Paddock broke the glass out of the windows of 134 and 135 in the Mandalay Bay, and there's as much glass on the ground as we see, and it makes sense that there would be a lot of trace evidence and glass particulate on his clothing, on his gloves, on his socks, in his shoes potentially, and setting one thing aside and ruling one thing out or another, I would like to see evidence that there's glass particulate on Stephen Paddock's body to prove to me that he actually broke out the windows. Now, if there's glass that matches the glass that is broken out and we find on the ground, it's pretty simple to say that he broke out that glass. Now, I'm not saying that he did or he didn't. It's just a matter of forensics and proving one hypothesis over another to prove a point. So as I move on through these clips, and I hope they work out this time compared to the last video. As you see at the beginning, I had indicated a Fair Use Act, and the videos that I'm going to be providing later on in my video, episode 4, is for educational purposes only. I'm not redistributing this for profit. I am distributing these video clips for educational purposes only. And a case study with regards to October 1st, 2017 shooting event that occurred at the Mandalay Bay and at the Route 91 Music Festival in Las Vegas. Now, this first piece of evidence or documentation that I'm providing here is simply the LVMPD FIT Report. And I am zoomed in on page 123 of 187, which lists the items of evidence that were retained by the FBI evidence recovery team. And the reason this is important, and it makes complete sense why they have these pieces of evidence recovered from Stephen Paddock, is because they would provide trace evidence on the material of these listed items. So as you can see here, they have his shirt, they have his pants, they have his socks, they have his slip-on shoes, his underwear, tissue from his ears, print exemplars, which is fingerprints that they must have taken at the scene. So they must have recovered the gloves and then pressed his finger on the paper to gather his fingerprints, which is what I thought all along. You know, yeah, we have a dead duck here, but we need to make sure that it's him. So we're going to compare his fingerprints to what we have on file, if we do have anything on file to prove that this is indeed who we think it is. And one projectile recovered from decedent's head. Also makes sense, and I also covered this in my previous episode. So showing this here, the FBI has these pieces of evidence, and if they have this piece of evidence and the investigators do their job, they would be able to collect trace evidence off of these materials. And as I zoom down to page 126, I just want to point this out with regards to the final interpretation, the 10-point interpretation that the FBI sent out as a quote-unquote final report. It's the most vague piece of document, the most vague document I've ever seen in my entire life. It was either written by a lawyer or it's just written completely summarized fashion to throw off folks like us that are actually trying to figure out what happened and get answers for the survivors and their families. So that's another video that I'd like to cover, is go over that summary, that crappy summary that I'm not buying as a final report. And I think it's just a misinformation tactic by the FBI to try to get everybody off their coattails and to try to throw off the public. But what I'm showing here is number 5. And I'm sure everybody has seen this before. This is how they came to their conclusion that Paddock acted alone. They followed up on 2,000 leads, 22,000 hours of video, and 252,000 images. That's a lot of images. And we have only maybe seen 30 or 40 images, maybe 50, based on the the FIT report here. The leaked images, that came a couple days after the shooting. We have nowhere near 252,000 images. And I'm assuming a lot of that is crime scene. I'm assuming a lot of that is autopsy. But, this paragraph 5, just proves that we have not been shown everything. I don't know if it's wishful thinking to think that we'd get everything, but it's just a joke that there's this much information and the FBI is not willing to release a lot of it. And, it just leads to more and more questions about why aren't they providing everything? If it's so cut and dry, he was the lone gunman, no help, no conspiracy. You have all this information, what's the harm of releasing it? So those are the kind of things that I think about when I'm looking at trying to prove something right or wrong. These things stick out in my head as cynical, and I think to myself, why aren't we given this information? So that was the point of me showing you bullet 5 of page 126 of the FIT report. This next image we've all seen before. So, the glass is over here, broken glass. There's broken glass all over. And I would assume that we'd find trace evidence somewhere on the body. We know that he has two of his, he has both hands with these fabric gloves. Certainly he would have some trace evidence on those gloves, breaking both windows with his hands, with the hammer. As you'll see, in one of these videos is you can also collect trace evidence from the hammer if you break glass. So if you break glass with a hammer, in some cases, there will be glass evidence on the hammer itself, which I didn't know before. I thought that glass particulate would only attach itself to a soft fabric. It never occurred to me that a piece of glass would be embedded into another hard object such as steel. So I found that interesting. But the point of this is what he's wearing, this is what the FBI has, and I hope the investigators did their job and collected the glass evidence on his clothing. Now, this next short clip, it's a 3-minute clip. It gives us a sense of what investigators go through to collect trace evidence from a crime scene. So I'm just going to play it here. And again, this is for educational purposes only, so this educates us on how investigators collect trace evidence in the lab.
Almost 100 years ago, Professor Edmund Lockhart stated, "For the microscopic debris that covers our clothes and bodies are the mute witnesses, sure and faithful to all of our movements and all of our encounters. The Trace Evidence Unit is responsible for collecting and analyzing that microscopic debris to help establish the elements of a crime. Analysis can be performed on the smallest of items, a single hair found on a weapon used in an assault, glass discovered on the clothing of a burglary suspect, and even microscopic particles of paint found on the victim of a hit and run. To gather trace evidence from a piece of clothing, an analyst will first visually inspect the item. Then, they scrape it down to isolate any debris containing potential trace evidence and collect it for further, more extensive examination. Materials that are frequently recovered and examined include hairs, fibers, glass, paint, construction material, tape, cords, rope, wood, and plant material. The Trace Evidence Unit analyzes explosives and explosive residue. They are also responsible for the examination of materials associated with the discharge of a firearm. This is known as gunshot primer residue testing. This kind of test is performed on a scanning electron microscope, which can magnify items up to 300,000 times their normal size. That's enough to detect microscopic particles of explosive primer on a suspect's hands or clothing. A common tool used by analysts in this unit is the comparison microscope. A comparison microscope is essentially two compound microscopes tied together with an optical bridge so that fine details of known samples can be compared side by side with samples of potential evidence. Other microscopes utilized in the microscopy laboratory include a polarizing microscope, fluorescence microscope, and phase contrast microscope. The scientists in the Trace Evidence Unit also utilize modern chemical analysis instruments in their evaluations. An ion chromatograph, for example, is routinely used to identify chemical ions contained in debris from explosives investigations.
My dogs had something to say about midway through, so I hope you enjoyed that as well. they are by no means experts on this stuff. So I implore you not to follow their lead on their opinion on forensics. They do, however, know how to bark, and they don't like the mailman. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. It's a short clip, but I think it's pretty informative on how evidence is collected and treated at the lab. This next clip is from a Forensics Files episode, and it has a little bit more to do on how glass is recovered and how it could tie a person to a scene or another scene, and again, how those bits of trace evidence are recovered. And this is the clip that actually talks about the trace evidence found on a crowbar in this case, which is obviously a metal crowbar, but it also relates to the room 135 and 134 with the blue hammer. So watch this clip. It does relate a lot to what we're talking about with regards to the Las Vegas shooting. This is the only way I can do this off my phone, because every other time that I try to record this YouTube clip on my computer, it does not record the sound.
Hate groups that had in the past vandalized synagogues and other houses of worship.
As police search for Gary Mattson and Winfield Mauder's killer, they inadvertently found evidence linking their murder suspects to the arson fires set to 3 California synagogues in the same night. All of the evidence from Matthew and Tyler Williams' car and apartment was sent to criminalist Faye Springer, an expert in trace evidence. She started with the glass shards found in the suspect's car.
Glass is not an organic material, so it's just made from silicon dioxide, sand basically, and melted. So glass varies a lot by refractive index, and depending on how it's made and what materials go into making it.
3 wavelengths of visible light are passed through the glass. The reflection of that light is measured under the refractive light index. Springer compared the glass in the suspect's car to the broken glass at the synagogues.
Glass at the arson at the synagogue was similar to glass in the suspect vehicle. It was the same type of glass, it had the same physical properties and chemical properties.
Blue coveralls found in the Williams brothers' home also contained glass fragments. So did 2 other objects found in the brothers' car.
The crowbars were sent down to my laboratory because we suspected that their synagogue arsons were either used crowbars or bats. Eventually we found some glass fragments that were similar to glass that was collected.
Microscopic examination of the crowbars also revealed green paint.
So I'd called and asked them, where the green paint came from, because I knew none of the synagogues had green paint on them. So I'd been to all of them. And they said, well, the only thing that we have is this fire at this medical clinic office building.
The medical office building was actually an abortion clinic which had burned the day after Gary and Winfield's murder. The abortion clinic had green trim around the doors where the arsonists entered the building.
I'll stop it here. I really didn't want to go any further into the paint evidence that was pulled from the crowbar, but as you can see from that small clip, is that they had found trace evidence of glass on the crowbar, which is interesting. And this episode has to do with glass evidence, as it relates to Stephen Paddock and the Las Vegas shooting. And finally, I'm going to end with this. And this is just a site that explains forensic trace evidence. And this section talks about glass. And it says where you can collect the broken fragments from, either large or small. They can be lodged in your shoes, clothing, hair, or skin. It goes on to explain it can connect, the type of glass can be connected to another site that is not obvious at the crime scene. So in the previous clip, we saw how a crime or a crowbar was tied to another location that also was used in a crime in another location. So this is talking about how you can trace a specific glass to another crime scene, and you can tell what type of glass it is, whether it's a windshield or a drinking glass or a window in a high-rise hotel. As you go down, and this is just an example of, probably a bad example of cracked glass. Doesn't relate to Mandalay Bay case. But the collection right here, trace examiners may use magnification, which we already saw, and light to find glass fragments on the clothing, which we already saw. An individual or at a crime scene can extract using tweezers, which again we saw. They say that tape can be used to remove the glass, but it's not preferred because the adhesive leaves a less than ideal situation for investigation. So we saw in the video that they're pretty much lay down a piece of thin paper and tap the piece of clothing down and kind of wrap it up that way. I just wanted to show another, here, I wanted to show another bit of information that's and corroborates what we've already seen. So in terms of collection, we kind of know how that happens. And then going back to the beginning, I assume that sorry about that. I assume that the FBI did their job with collecting trace evidence from Stephen Paddock's body, and with 252,000 images, I would assume that we would be shown that this happened, and we would be shown the results of what the FBI investigation had come up with. So hopefully that FOIA report with those 13,000 pages of evidence or documentation comes out, and we have a lot of images that we're able to look at. And I hope there's a lot of documentation that comes from that FOIA request. Again, this is episode 4, Glass Particulate Trace Evidence Collection. I hope you all enjoyed it. I am attempting to do a video with headphones on, so I have better audio quality. The last episode, episode 3, which I had to chop up because it wouldn't get posted by YouTube, the audio kind of sucked. So I'm hoping that with this headset on, it's clearer and I don't have to edit as much, because I provided a fair use disclaimer at the beginning of this video, once again, to proclaim that this video is only for educational purposes only. All right? Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed. See you on the next one.